To celebrate its 40th anniversary, let's dive into one of the most influential comic books of all time, and the toy line that inspired it, Marvel's Superhero Secret Wars. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics, history, and action figures. Secret Wars was a foundational piece of my childhood. The story and its characterization formed my understanding of the greater Marvel Universe and shaped my love of the characters for decades to come. In this 4-part series, we're going to see how a failed action figure line led to the biggest comic of the 1980s. Then, analyze the story issue by issue, and check out the action figures from the past, then use those from the present to recreate the covers of this landmark limited series. Toy maker Mattel had recently lost the DC Comics license to rival Kenner, who immediately began production of the immensely popular Superpowers line. Fearing a loss of market share, Mattel's marketing team leapt into action, discovering that kids responded to the words war and secret. So they took this kernel of an idea to Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter and pitched him the idea of a toy line with a comic book tie-in to boost sales. Shooter was a comics prodigy. His first comic was published when he was only 14 years old. During his first stint at DC, he created numerous characters, often mimicking the character-driven stories being done at Marvel that he felt DC lacked at the time. Following a multitude of odd jobs in the advertising industry, Shooter was hired as an editor at Marvel in 1976. Within 2 years, he had risen to editor-in-chief. During his 9-year reign, Marvel produced some of the most memorable comics of all time, including the Dark Phoenix saga, Frank Miller's groundbreaking work on Daredevil, and Walt Simonson's epic reimagining of Thor. But Shooter's time wasn't without controversy. He introduced strong editorial control over the titles and instituted strict deadlines. John Burns said, "Shooter reshaped the Marvel Universe in his own image. So when the time came to write a company-wide crossover featuring a multitude of Marvel's heroes and villains, Shooter knew that there was only one man for the job. Jim Shooter." And he may well have been right, as the first issue became the highest-selling Marvel comic in 25 years. So let's take a deep dive into that first issue with the iconic Mike Zeck cover, recreated here with Marvel Legends action figures. This art has become synonymous with Marvel Comics in the 1980s. In the month preceding that first issue, comic readers saw their heroes enter a strange vessel in Central Park's Sheep Meadow, and then disappear. Instantly, they were transported across the stars, where they witnessed unbelievable power as an entire galaxy was swept away before them. It was enough to astonish the gods. Next, they saw a planet being formed, remnants of other worlds colliding together. And at last, a voice from beyond the stars spoke, saying, "Slay your enemies, and all you desire shall be yours." But just who were these combatants in this high-stakes cosmic battle? The first ship was filled with Earth's greatest champions, including the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and of course Spider-Man. While the other ship was equally loaded with those that would be considered villains, a gathering of forces for war. But instantly, Shooter subverts expectations, placing Magneto on board with the heroes. It adds a layer of complexity to the story and reminds us that the line between good guys and bad guys is not always so black and white. Meanwhile, on the second ship, chaos immediately ensues as the android Ultron wastes little time in resuming his prime objective of slaying all living things. His actions gain the attention of the one called Galactus, who in an instant snuffs Ultron's life force like a candle. Galactus is a being beyond good and evil. He's more of a force of the universe, the destroyer of worlds, who feeds off the energy of inhabited planets. He senses in the Beyonder one powerful enough to end his insatiable hunger, and as he streaks towards the abyss, the ever-conniving Doom attempts to join. It doesn't go well, as both are swatted back to Battleworld as we would a simple housefly. The two armies then separate, and upon landing, conflict resumes, with the Avengers calling Magneto a murderer, while his fellow mutants defend their greatest enemy. I had just started reading comics at this point, but in the matter of a few panels, I understood that while the X-Men were considered heroes, they were still outcast, mistrusted, and feared for being different. Shooter laid the foundation of prejudice, the central tenet of X-Men comics, over these 2 pages. With Magneto gone, the heroes debate who should lead them, with names like Mr. Fantastic, the Hulk, and Professor X bandied about. But there was only one true choice: Captain America. The perfect place to start looking at Secret Wars figures is with the Sentinel of Liberty, Captain America. Cap shows the basic template for the line. They all feature 5 points of articulation: shoulders, hips, and neck. Cap is on the bigger body, but the difference in sculpting is minimal. Pretty much every figure in this line looks the same. While Superpowers figures each had a play feature that mimicked their unique abilities, Secret Wars figures came with a lenticular shield? Yep. At least they did the square for the bad guys and the round for the good guys, which means the one character who really should have had a shield got one that looks pretty accurate. You could take the small paper disc, which kind of looked like a drunk 4-year-old's Mother's Day present, and place them in the shield, and voila! With a simple turning motion, you can clearly see the multiple images. It was magic! Keep in mind, our video games looked like this. But in all seriousness, this was a super accurate Captain America, with all the details of his classic suit included, even the gloves, boot cuffs, and wings on his iconic mask. But action figures have come a long way in 40 years, and the 30th anniversary Captain America from Marvel Legends is, for my money, the very best Cap figure of all time. The colors perfectly capture the comic page, and no detail is spared, right down to the chainmail armor on his chest. I do display mine with custom heads from ATK Sculpture, both stoic and screaming versions. Far and away, my favorite Captain America figure. Meanwhile, as the villains settle into their new base, Doom returns and is offered leadership in the coming war. But having witnessed the true might of the Beyonder firsthand, Doom is not satisfied to play into his silly game. He collapses the fortress around those whom he considers simple-minded dolts and prepares to seek the counsel of his greatest enemy, Reed Richards. But as he makes his escape, the treacherous Kang blasts his ship out of the sky. The explosion alerts the heroes, who make their way to the crash site, where they find a wounded Dr. Doom. As Captain America seeks to help his fallen foe, all parties are suddenly under a surprise attack, and the Secret Wars have begun. The first issue lays the foundation for the conflict and introduces the Beyonder, but it's the deeper characterizations that make the issue work, particularly the complex motivations of the leading figures, none more so than Dr. Doom. Doom was in the original Secret Wars line, but we'll get to that figure later. I was planning on showcasing any one of the excellent Dr. Doom figures from Marvel Legends. Then, this showed up at my door. The Mezco 112 Collection Silver Age Dr. Doom. This thing is a beast, with solid metal lower extremities and a bendy wire cloth cape. Mezco hit the sweet spot between the soft goods of Doom's tunic and the sculpted aspects of his armor. And of course, he comes with a ton of accessories, like this Book of Dark Magic, which allows him to cast spells from his hands or strike down his enemies Emperor Palpatine style. But Doom is a man of both magic and science, so Mezco made sure to include his rocket jets on his back, as well as whatever this contraption is. I'm not sure, but it looks like something Jack Kirby would have drawn. And it lights up. Pretty cool. I must say, I think Mezco has provided us with the definitive 6-inch Dr. Doom figure. Enjoying this deep dive into the comics history and action figures behind Secret Wars? Hit that subscribe button, because we're bringing you videos like this every week. The second issue picks up right where the first left off, and while most of the issue is taken up with the first great battle of the war, strategic pieces are put into play, and one of our heroes' lives is changed forever. Our heroes prepare for battle, with Wolverine hungry for action and Cap barking orders. The villains are using alien technology found on Battleworld to mount their attack. Remember, this was a comic created to promote a toy line, and while Jim Shooter said Mattel didn't really get in the way, they did have some requests, such as vehicles, allowing them to sell outlandish creations such as the Doom Roller here. Speaking of Doom, He sneaks off in the heat of battle, concerned only with his own agenda. He finds the fallen body of Galactus and attempts to revive him. Once awakened, Galactus simply ignores Doom, lost in whatever thoughts the gods ponder. Undeterred, Doom returns to the villain's base, where he comes across the shell of Ultron, and thus begins plotting anew. The heroes gain victory in the first battle, and begin searching for a shelter for themselves and their prisoners. 'Cause, remember, you still gotta sell toys. Things settle a bit, and Cap gathers the troops for a pep talk. Wolverine, however, is having none of it. In a quiet moment, Cyclops and Reed Richards share their experiences, and while it serves in part as a deus ex machina to cover some of the contrived plot holes in how all these characters came together, such as Professor X arriving in a wheelchair when he had regained mobility in the recent X-Men comics, it also provides a touching moment when Cyclops reveals that he was taken from his honeymoon, cheated of joy, just as he was on the verge of real happiness.
Cyclops is my favorite X-Man, and I think it's because the poor guy just can't catch a break, and yet he still turns out to be the consummate leader of the team. I mean, even as a child, he and his younger brother are dumped out of a burning plane by their parents, orphaned, and then separated, and he grows up in an orphanage all by himself. And yes, I know there has been a lot added to that story since then, but that was the way that Scott knew it growing up as a child. Then, it's terrible to be a mutant, but imagine being a mutant whose power is that every time you open your eyes, you destroy everything you look at. It's so bad. And yet, when he came to Xavier's school, he found a home, he found a family, he found the confidence to be the leader that he needed to be, and he actually got the girl, only for her to die over and over and over again. I mean, this dude has the worst luck. And it extends to action figures. This is such a simple costume. They could have taken the Mattel Captain America Secret Wars figure, not made a single change, kept the boots, kept the gloves, just put a new head on it. Boom, you've got a Cyclops. Nope, they didn't make one. And it's even worse with Marvel Legends because I think we've gotten 3 different astonishing X-Men versions of Cyclops, but this is the only one that we have seen in his classic blue and yellow suit. The one that he wore from his time as a part of the founding members of the new X-Men all the way through the Byrne Claremont issues of the 80s. Come on, Hasbro. Give my man Cyclops here a break. Get us a new figure, because this one came in that 3-pack with Wolverine and Phoenix, and it is pricey. And I know that there are a lot of other collectors out there who could really use a new Cyclops.
The remnants of the villains limp home to find the good doctor greeting them to Doom Base. They are not pleased, so Doom sicks his new lackey, the revived Ultron, on them, and the chain of command is quickly established anew. Meanwhile, our 2 youngest heroes, the Torch and Spidey, are seen hanging out. This was my introduction to their friendship, and I've always thought it's one of the greatest and most natural relationships in comics. All of a sudden, the alarms go off. They sprint into action, only to discover that Magneto has infiltrated their stronghold. As they chase after him in vain, the Wasp is ensnared, and just as the thing has almost reached her, he transforms back into his human form of Ben Grimm. This unexpected twist will have long-term ramifications, not just on the Thing, but on the Fantastic Four as well. Oh boy, Magneto is where the concept of one base body for everyone really goes off the rails. But let's start with the good. The sculpting of the helmet is solid. It has the wing thingy in the middle and the spiky stuff around the face opening. But the lack of paint apps on the face is just not good. The rest of the figure is fully phoned in. I mean, are we supposed to believe that these little circles are the raised metal rivets of Magneto's armor? Of course, this figure's greatest sin is the lack of a cape. You don't really realize just how vital the cape is to the character's look until it's gone. But hey, lenticular shield. Once again, I'm going outside of Marvel Legends to find the perfect Magneto figure, this time to Medicom Toys' Mafex line. Where Mattel committed the cardinal sin of leaving out the cape, the Mafex version comes with a satiny pleated purple cloak whose underwire allows for dynamic posing. The crucial features of Magneto's costume are highlighted, from the bold rivets all the way down to the striped boots. Plus, alternate heads accentuate the well-sculpted helmet. All while numerous bonus hands recreate his mastery of magnetism. Mafex figures do tend to be scaled slightly smaller than Legends, but when the details are done this well, the end result is fantastic. Ben Grimm, the ever-loving blue-eyed thing. Now, you know there was no way that Mattel was going to make a body this unique, not when they had basically put every single one of their figures on the same slim, athletic body. So there wasn't any chance that we were going to get a Thing figure back in 1984, but thankfully we've gotten a ton since then, and this is the same sculpt as the Walgreens Thing that came out with really one of the best waves of Fantastic Four figures ever, the Walgreens exclusive ones. But there's a little bit of changes to this one. He's a slightly brighter orange and has a little bit of a different kind of color fade to him. He also has a different head, and I like this one. It has a good heavy brow that kind of matches the art of Mike Zeck from this particular comic, and his mouth's open, which gives him a little bit more expression. But the key thing is the shorts. These are the shorts that are the John Byrne era design. So this is exactly what the Thing was wearing. The FF had traditionally worn their Jack Kirby costumes, which were more blue and black, until they went on an adventure in the Negative Zone. And when they returned, the unstable molecules of their costume had basically inverted the look of their outfits. The black was now white, and the blue became this darker blue. And it's just a really good look, and this Thing perfectly captures the look from that era. Issue 3 sees the conflict brewing amongst the teams, both internally and externally. And as we shall learn, that conflict spilled over into the Marvel offices as well. Oh, and hey, I put a ton of love and effort into these comic cover recreations, so if you like them, let me know in the comments. This issue is titled Tempest Without, Crisis Within, and as a monster storm rages across the planet of Battleworld, the different factions plot their next moves, beginning with Magneto. With a simple thought, he releases his captive, the Wasp, and then invites her to have a drink? While his advances are initially denied, Ol' Mags turns on the charm, leading to the creepiest May-September Stockholm Syndrome in the history of comics. Ugh. Anyway, back at Good Guy Base, the storm dislodges a boulder large enough to crush it, but the mighty Thor stands ready, and with his trusty hammer, smashes it into tiny pieces. This really doesn't have anything to do with the plot, I just think this panel is so awesome I had to show it. Back inside, new relationships form, like between Captain Marvel and Iron Man, the only two African-American heroes in the book. Remember, this story occurred when James Rhodes was in the armor, as Tony Stark dealt with alcoholism. And more personal drama, as Reed mopes about missing his pregnant wife, the Invisible Girl, which probably explains her absence from the book. And before y'all fill up the comments, Sue didn't change her name to the Invisible Woman until issue 284 of the FF after a torturous battle with the Psycho Man. That happened a couple of years after this. Spidey finds himself roaming around the base when he stumbles upon the X-Men's quarters. He overhears them discussing the tension they feel, the hatred for being mutants. And just as Professor X makes the final decision to leave and join Magneto, Spidey crashes through the ceiling to stop them. He uses the combination of his speed and agility in the confined space, along with his spider sense,
please do not start calling it my Peter Tingle,
to defeat the X-Men. Just as he's about to tell a grown-up, in this case Mr. Fantastic, Professor X wipes his mind. It's a clear violation, and as the X-Men leave to join Magneto, Mike Zeck's art makes it clear these aren't the good guys anymore. Remember how I said Jim Shooter felt like he was the only one who could write this book? He was almost certainly correct, as the individual writers of the different Marvel titles were fiercely loyal to their characters. For example, X-Men scribe Chris Claremont got into a shouting match with Shooter over this scene. How could Spider-Man possibly defeat the entire X-team? In the end, Shooter, the editor-in-chief, and Claremont's boss won the argument. Now you know we can't have a line of Marvel action figures without Spider-Man. I genuinely think that Spidey is the best of the Mattel body sculpts, almost like they picked his lithe, agile, athletic frame to use as a base and then built everything else around it. There are things that I love about this figure, like the huge spider on the back, but it has its flaws as well, particularly how the web lines don't match up over the top of the shoulders. While this is the figure that I have in my Secret Wars display, this is the figure that my grandfather got me all the way back in 1984. You can see it has been well loved over the years. The web pattern has basically worn off the chest from play, but that's okay. I think it makes him look more like the Spidey from the 1967 cartoon. Longtime viewers of the channel know that I did a 64-figure tournament to determine the best Marvel Legends Spider-Man. And the winner was the red and blue version of the Amazing Fantasy 15 body that came in the 3-pack with Iceman and Firestar. And that is a really, really good figure. But it's not the right figure for this mid-80s Spidey drawn by Mike Zeck in Secret Wars. No, that still goes to the retro-carded Spidey. There's just something about this figure. The play value, the posing, the way this abdomen crunches, and all of these great bends he can get into. Plus, he just has that classic 80s head sculpt. A couple of other differences. A lot of people love the Renew Your Vows Spidey, but the spider symbol on his chest is just way too big, whereas it's a perfectly 80s design here, as well as the Spidey on the back. Other people also fuss about these pins, that the newer figures are pinless, and I'll grant you, I don't like the fact that it does have those red pins there, but that's not enough. This is the right frame. It's muscular. It's more muscular than the Amazing Fantasy frame, but it's not as muscular as the Renew Your Vows. It just hits right where it needs to for the 1980s. And this is the one that I've used in all of my action figure photography and all of the poses, recreating those great covers that include Spider-Man. This is my Secret Wars Spider-Man. While the heroes were fracturing, Doom was making his move. With several of his number captured, he needs to reinforce his troops. Using conveniently simple alien technology, he transformed 2 suburban Denverites, their neighborhood later revealed to be a fragment of the cobbled-together planet, into Volcana and Titania. Their numbers restocked. They launched an attack at dawn, taking the heroes by surprise. The newest recruits proved quite capable, and Captain America orders a full retreat. With their surprisingly easy victory and the rescue of their captured comrades, Doom's side had turned the tide of war in their favor. Look, it's pretty obvious that the biggest missing links in our Secret Wars collections are Volcana and Titania. And as I started working on this video, rumors spread of a 6-figure wave celebrating the 40th anniversary of this groundbreaking comic. Figures would be on retro cardbacks, and it was scheduled for later in 2024. Is it just a rumor, or is Hasbro going to complete the collection of main characters from this book? More to follow. The greatest heroes and most evil villains of Marvel Comics were pitted against each other in Secret Wars. But as we move into our second chapter, shifting allegiances and new additions have turned the tide of the war. This time looking at issues 4 through 6, a major turning point in the series. And of course, we're continuing our cover recreations, using modern Marvel Legends figures to capture the look and spirit of that incredible 80s art. In our first chapter, we talked about how Marvel Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter was the only choice to write a company-wide crossover of all the biggest heroes and villains. But who had the skill to draw such an ambitious project, one that would require sometimes 30 unique characters in a single issue? The answer was George Perez. There was just one tiny problem. Perez was working for DC at the time. In fact, he was gearing up for his own epic event, Crisis on Infinite Earths. But Marvel was very fortunate to have their own budding superstar ready and willing to take on the challenge, Mike Zeck. Zeck got his start in the early 70s where many artists did, Charlton Comics. Charlton was a notoriously cheap company. They got their start publishing song lyrics off a hand-me-down printing press originally used to print cereal boxes. Because this ancient behemoth of a press was cheaper to keep running than to start and stop daily, they just started cranking out comics 24 hours a day. Romance, mystery, western, anything that could be done cheaply. Veteran artists like Steve Ditko loved it at Charlton because there was virtually zero editorial oversight.
And young writer-artists like John Byrne, Roger Stern, and Bob Layton earned their chops before moving on to larger projects at Marvel and DC. For Zeck, his big break came penciling Master of Kung Fu with writer Doug Minch. Then in 1981, he became the regular artist on Captain America, teaming up with inker John Beatty on what would become a lengthy artistic partnership. And partnership's a real thing. An inker can make or break a penciler, and Beatty and Zeck's styles merged perfectly. When Zeck was offered the job for Secret Wars, the first person he contacted was Beatty to make sure that he was on board. The two had loved their time together on Captain America, but this was an opportunity too big to pass up. If you want to see just how incredible of an artist Mike Zeck is, particularly when paired with John Beatty, look no further than IDW's artist edition of Mike Zeck's classic Marvel stories. Now, you might recognize the cover image here because obviously it's the cover to Secret Wars #1, but there's some interesting things. You can see, look, here's Mr. Fantastic, up here's Thor. We're going to get to that, but let's take a peek at some of this art. We're going to start kind of back here in the back with some of the earlier team-up work between Zeck and Beatty. And, this is from the early 80s, but you can already see just how great they do at drawing Captain America and putting it together. Beatty is really good at using this zipatone effect. You can see it here. It creates these amazing shadows, and he uses it pretty much throughout all of his work, and we saw a lot of that on his Secret Wars work too. But let's come back to a project that they did after Secret Wars, the Punisher miniseries. Again, look at that zipatone effect that Beatty is using in his inking, but also just the dynamic action that Zeck is able to put on the page. I mean, this here where Frank Castle is throwing a punch and just completely knocking the wind out of this guy. He's tossing these dudes. But then the covers, oh my gosh, this opening splash page, just beautiful. I think there's a cover probably coming up right here. Incredible work. I mean, this was a beautiful, beautiful work by the pair. But let's move forward a little bit and we'll take a peek at some of the original art for Secret Wars. Here are some pages from the very first issue. In fact, look at this. Here, this is so much on the inker to get this action in, but it has to be grounded in spectacular drawing by the artist. I mean, just beautiful action. Look at that zipatone effect on Iron Man to really bring his armor out. Oh my gosh. I also think it's pretty funny. This is the original page work. See, it's just reprinted and you can see the Secret Wars. Shh, it's a secret on here. But let's look. There's a giant gatefold in here of the cover to the first issue. So let's try to, before we do, look at that splash page. Just look at everything happening here. That first issue, I know they took a little bit of extra time on it. They probably got started on it earlier, and so they were able to crush the detail of this. I mean, to see what the original art looked like is just absolutely amazing. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the original art for the cover. And here it is. I'm going to leave it long ways on the screen. I know that's a little bit awkward, but there's some things that you can see that are different from this to the published page. First off, here's Kitty Pryde. She did not appear in the comic at all. That was probably a running change to the story. Up at the top, there is Thor, and here's Mr. Fantastic. They were not on that original cover. And I really kind of wondered why. This is clearly how it was originally drawn, and, I kind of wanted to know what the deal was. I figured the best person to ask was Mike Zeck himself, so I shot him an email.
And he answered me that same day. Turns out, the cover art was produced well in advance of the first issue and had a dual purpose. It was also going to serve as an in-store promotional poster to be given to comic shops. He said that he created the art with the poster in mind, knowing that Mr. Fantastic and Thor could be deleted to create space for the logo elements of the final cover. And, as expected, the story evolved, and Kitty Pryde was cut after the drawing was complete. But all of this hard work took its toll, and Zeck and Beatty were struggling with Shooter's hard and fast monthly deadlines. So they called their friend and fellow Charlton alum, Bob Layton, to help fill in on issues 4 and 5. Issue 4 starts with a bang, literally, as the villains destroy the hero's base. While they rummage through the wreckage searching for survivors, Dr. Octopus spots them gathering 5 miles away. They prepare to attack again, but a newly confident Molecule Man assures them that won't be necessary, as he simply picks up an entire mountain range and proceeds to drop it on our unsuspecting heroes. Molecule Man has one of the most complex character arcs in the entire book. First appearing all the way back in Fantastic Four issue 20, he was often treated as a joke of a villain, despite his ability to control all molecules. When we first see him in issue 1, he's a sniveling weakling, afraid to use his powers. Doom recognizes the virtually limitless abilities he possesses, and uses a very different tact with him, showing him the respect that he has never before received. But it's the affection of Volcana that truly turns mild-mannered Owen Reese into the Molecule Man. This was one of the biggest holes in my Secret Wars Modern collection, one of the final 2 figures we needed to complete the characters who were on those 2 transports. I feel like the costume is pretty accurate to the 80s era, with those 80s electric shoulder pads tapering down to the waist, where his top extends below his lightning bolt belt. I like the baggy pants. It works for a character who's not known for muscle. But you have to get the head sculpt right. And this one is spot on, from the slick back hair to those distinctive Jack Kirby designed scars. Perhaps we could have been on a scrawnier frame, but this is the last Molecule Man I'll ever need. Meanwhile, with our heroes presumed dead, Magneto's ongoing seduction of the Wasp is interrupted by the arrival of the X-Men. Magneto lays out his plan, an aggressive one, designed to slaughter his enemies and use the Beyonders' powers to create an Earth where mutants and men could live in peace. This was quite enough for the Wasp, who shrinks down, zips through the X-Men, and takes off in a commandeered ship. Just as Magneto was to strike her down for such mockery, Xavier stops him, recalling his own weakness in mind-wiping Spidey, calling himself no better than Hitler in that moment, an illusion that brings pause to Holocaust survivor Magneto. Dr. Doom is doing a little housekeeping of his own. In response to Kang's betrayal in the first issue, Doom has his pet Ultron disintegrate Kang, to the horror of his fellow villains. Kang always seemed like a really bad fit for this story. As a virtually immortal Time Lord, he would have had very little use for Beyonder's game. Writer Jim Shooter must have felt the same, as he dispatched him at first chance. I wonder if his inclusion was a Mattel decision. If so, that was one of the most epic fails in marketing, as Kang's Secret Wars figure became the greatest peg warmer in the history of toys. Yes, maybe the most overlooked figure of the 1980s, which I think was due more to the obscurity of the character than the merits of the figure. I mean, that's a pretty spot-on Kang head sculpt, and in a line known for cutting every corner possible, Kang got an additional plastic armor piece to provide a distinctive look. Mattel showed no disrespect to Kang, no. That would be Hasbro for putting out this version in the earliest days of the line. They fully made up for it, though, with this 2020 updated figure. A perfect head sculpt with subtle paint apps leads to a tapered blouse, I guess? Look, we all know Kang's a time traveler, but I'm glad I don't live in whatever era he found thigh-high boots on men to be cool. Fashion choices aside, this is exactly what a comic Kang should be. But what of our heroes? Crushed under an entire mountain range. I thought this was a 12-issue series, not a 4... Oh, wait. There they are. Trapped beneath 2 miles of solid rock. The only thing standing between them and certain death is the strength of Hulk's back. But time and air are running out, so they wake the only man that can help them get out of this. Reed Richards. It only takes him a few seconds to assess the situation. Then, using his brilliant intellect, he MacGyvers the crap out of things, taking electronics from Hawkeye's arrows, combined with Spidey's web shooters, and routes the whole thing through Iron Man's armor. Captain America asks if he can help. Reed simply says no. Only brains can save them now. But in an uncharacteristic move, Reed taunts fellow genius Bruce Banner, calling him a simple brute, angering the Hulk all the more. With his makeshift device ready, Reed has Johnny and Captain Marvel channel all their energies into Iron Man's armor, overloading it until finally... These are arguably my two favorite pages of the entire series. While the Hulk's might gave them a chance, it was only the ingenuity and intellect of Reed Richards that saved the day. As a budding nerdling, my heart swelled with pride. Once clear, Richards immediately apologized to Hulk, respectfully addressing him as Dr. Banner. But there was no need. He had realized that Reed's insults were specifically designed to enrage the Hulk, increasing his strength so that he could hold on for those final few seconds. The Hulk was in a transition stage at this point. Yes, he has the intellect of Banner, but he realizes he is quickly losing it. His struggle causing him to miss the alarms in the previous issue, which allowed the villain's surprise attack to succeed. Once the Secret Wars were complete, he would soon lose all control again, becoming a mindless rage monster.
At the time of Secret Wars' release in 1984, the Hulk was probably the second most well-known Marvel character behind only Spider-Man, and that's due to his appearance on his hit TV show in the late 70s and early 80s. And there was no way that Mattel was going to create a brand new form factor and give us a Hulk figure in the line. I mean, this line is notorious for its cost cutting, so the likelihood of actually getting a Hulk is virtually zero. So I really like this 2006 Toy Biz Face-Off series Hulk. I think it's one of the best ones that we've ever gotten. There's just something so just raging about that head sculpt. It's just really, really good. You know, some of the articulation is a little bit dated, as we might see, but this is still a good Hulk figure and one that's been on display in my Avengers lineup for a long time. Of the newer Hulks, probably the Marvel Legends 20th Anniversary Hulk is my favorite. Huge body, great frame, much better modern articulation. But this head sculpt, even though I really love it, with the hair kind of coming down over his ears and this face, it's more of a 70s Hulk more so than the 80s Hulk. So I think for Secret Wars, we got to go with the Hulk that came in the 80th Anniversary 2-pack with the Origin Wolverine. This is really a much more 80s Hulk. You can see he's a brighter green. His hair is a little bit different. It's more kind of that era that Mike Zeck was drawing. So I think this is really the most representative Hulk from Secret Wars.
Battered and broken, our heroes shelter in a nearby village within eyesight of Galactus. A local healer treats their wounds with some unbeknownst side effects. The mighty Thor has rejoined them. He had freed, then sought counsel with his fellow Asgardian, the Enchantress, looking to form a coalition between the two gods. It was not to be. Back in the village, Reed stares up at the mighty Galactus, when things suddenly go from bad to worse.
When it comes to Marvel Legends Thor figures, this is pretty easy. The 80th Anniversary Thor takes the cake. It just is such a classic representation of the Thunder God. The suit is correct. We've got the big silver, circles here. He's got the boots with the paint app, so you can see, kind of the black in between, these swashes of cloth. Hammer with the inscription on it. Great head sculpt. It's not really specific to any one artist, but it just is a good general representation of Thor. Just everything that you could really want in a Marvel Legends Thor figure. It's the right size. He's bigger than most everybody else. The only thing that would really make this figure better, taking the sticky gum off of it, would be a cloth cape. If he came with a cloth cape with underwire, that would absolutely crush it. Now, Mafex gave us a Thor here this past year that did have the cloth cape, but he's just so small. He doesn't scale with Marvel Legends the way that this guy does. So we got to stick with this particular Norse god for Secret Wars.
As this series has progressed, the differing factions had split into 4 separate camps. The villains, led by Dr. Doom. Captain America's beleaguered side. The combined mutant forces of Magneto and the X-Men, while Galactus stood alone. But as the 5th issue opens, Galactus' plans become more clear. In the ultimate boss move, the Devourer of Worlds has summoned his home ship. Richards recognizes the significance and attempts to contact him, but is quickly rebuffed. Now alerted of the hero's presence, Galactus sends his watchdog down to dispatch them. But through Cap's experienced leadership and Torch's Nova Flame, The menace is defeated.
The Human Torch is another figure that I think really could have pretty easily been done by Mattel. He certainly would have fit on their standard body frame, and you could have made him just basically that red orange with the little black lines as he was drawn at the time. You didn't even have to really add a whole lot of extra plastic for fire effects. He would have worked really well. He would have looked totally stupid carrying one of the lenticular shields, but that certainly didn't stop them from doing that for Spider-Man. Thankfully, we got kind of the perfect 80s Torch in the Fantastic Four retro card line. This one is just great. I mean, it certainly carries everything that you want the Torch to have. It's got the translucent plastic, so when you get it in certain light, you can see it shine through. He does have those 80s black lines drawn on him from the head all the way down, so it really does make it look like exactly how he was drawn during that era, during that John Byrne, Mike Zeck era. But Torch had kind of a fairly lengthy storyline throughout Secret Wars. You know, he had his affair with the alien villager Zaja, who was the healer. And because of that, we saw Torch outside of his powered up version quite a bit. So, lucky for us, that version also appeared in the retro card back line. And is a pretty strong Johnny in the correct suit. He's in the negative zone suit where the colors are white and blue and works really well. Just a little bit of flame on his hands, but gives us kind of a powered down, flame off Johnny Storm to add to our collections.
Galactus' distraction allows Doom's troops to attack again. The heroes are on the cusp of ultimate defeat when the X-Men arrive to lend a hand. Losses are heavy on both sides, and each makes a hasty retreat. The X-Men, particularly Wolverine, were enraged to leave Colossus behind, but Professor X stands his ground.
All right, not only am I going no wheelchair here for Professor X to give respect to the fact that he could actually walk during Secret Wars, but I'm taking it way back old school with the Toy Biz Professor X. Yes, I know the hover chair one that came with kind of the 90s Jim Lee look is, you know, arguably a better figure. But just look at how great this Toy Biz figure is. I mean, he's got great sculpting. You know, his hands kind of have that crazy flappy hand, but it does let you kind of bring it up, you know, so that he can do like his telekinesis kind of look. You know, he can put his head down, put his hands right up to his temple, be thinking about that, be thinking about mind wiping Spidey or talking back to Magneto. Great suit, you know, he's like got the vest, and the jacket has a little bit of play to it so that you can move it around. Just a really good Professor X figure from early in the Toy Biz line.
While these battles were going on, the Enchantress made her play, appealing to Doom's vanity, offering to heal his scarred face. While tempted, Doom declines, and with that, the Enchantress is gone. Enchantress was part of the 2016 San Diego Comic-Con Raft box set, and as would be expected of a new figure in a convention-exclusive pack, she was pretty hot on the aftermarket. But later that same year, this version was released in the Dormammu Build-A-Figure wave. While the exclusive had a shinier paint on the green of her costume, this figure had far superior paint apps on the face. Both had those great Kirby-styled stockings, truly the highlight of an otherwise uninspired design. Enchantress is, however, a necessary part of our Secret Wars collection. After a 2-issue break to catch back up on deadlines, the art team of Mike Zeck and John Beatty returned for issue 6. However, it was still Bob Layton on the cover, essentially a villain's version of that monumental cover to issue 1. Unfortunately, on my reproduction, I did have to make one switch, replacing Titania, who's still missing from our collections, with Molecule Man. The issue starts as we check back in with the Wasp, frantically fleeing Magneto's fortress. She crashes her vehicle, certainly not because she's a female driver, although she does complain about breaking a nail in the crash. Lost in an otherworldly swamp, she comes across another castaway, the Lizard. Noticing he was injured, she dresses his wounds, thus forming a connection, despite telling him she would turn him into a purse if he misbehaves. It's a nice moment. So of course she is murdered in the very next panel. An enraged Lizard attacks those responsible, the Wrecking Crew, before being frozen in a status beam. And here we have the lovely Janet Van Dyne, the wondrous Wasp, and all the different Wasp figures that I have.
she was someone who changed her costume constantly, so it doesn't really bother me that we don't have a true Secret Wars costume for her. But let's take a look at the ones that we do have and see which one we think fits the best. So right off the bat, we have 2 Toy Biz figures on the left, 2 Hasbro figures on the right. And as you can see, the ones on either end are actually the same costume. And it's pretty clear, even though all 4 of these have different haircuts, this is certainly the weakest of the figures. Just terrible old Toy Biz body, not going to work. And we can't have 2 of the same one. So we'll go ahead and move her out. And while we're at it, even though this is such a good figure, it really represents more of the George Perez kind of early 2000s versions of the Avengers. So it's a little bit too modern for what we're going for. So we're left with 1 Toy Biz and 1 Hasbro figure. And honestly, I think I could see both of them in Secret Wars. They're both very good. I've actually used both of them in my action figure photography. The one on the left was on the cover of the first issue, and the one on the right has been on the covers of other issues. The one on the left, the red suit, is probably closer to the Secret Wars outfit, but truthfully, that's the best Wasp figure that we've gotten so far. So this is the one that we're going to stick with for our display. Another figure where I'm going to make kind of an unconventional choice is with the Lizard. So I have the Walmart exclusive Lizard from just not too long ago in Marvel Legends, and it's terrific. It definitely, is a comic-y look. It's maybe a little closer to the cartoon, but it's a great Lizard, but it just doesn't have kind of the grime and the lizardiness that this old school Toy Biz figure had. Toy Biz was not afraid to go heavy on the paint wash, and you can see that here on these pants where it really gives him a lived in, kind of worn in look. His ripped shirt is sculpted well, and the flare of his coat with even some like scuffing of his lab coat just looks really natural. There is a bendy wire in this tail, which is sweet, but I love that head sculpt, that kind of mix of dinosaur lizard head sculpt with an articulated jaw. So you can have him down or you can have him kind of full on attack mode, and his giant claws really will work well for that. So this is one that, yes, we have gotten newer figures, and in many ways it's a better figure, but there's just something so charming and grimy and grungy about this Lizard that this is the one that I want representing my Secret Wars version. Back at Magneto's base, Professor X reaches out to read the minds of the villains in an attempt to determine their next move. Then he telepathically orders the X-Men to protect an active volcano, a mission to be led by Cyclops. And with that, Storm had had enough. While Cyclops had been the X-Men's field leader for many years, this was now Storm's team, and she confronted Xavier over his assertion of control. The Professor demanded allegiance, threatening that if it was not offered, it would be taken. Storm leaves as the rift between Professor X and his X-Men widens. So much of our nostalgic draw to these characters is related to how we were first introduced to them. If you were a 70s comic reader, then Dave Cockrum's Goddess Storm will always be your choice. If the X-Men cartoon was your entry point, then a white-suited, dual-caped Storm will be the one for you. But for me, a kid of the 1980s, my Storm is a leather jacket-wearing, mohawk-flowing, punk rock leader of the X-Men. This 2017 figure oozes that defiant energy, best defined by the subtle smirk on her face. As I've said, Secret Wars defined my love for these characters, so that makes this my definitive Storm. In the hero's village, Colossus continues to heal with the help of the alien Zaja, unaware that her healing powers also cause the patient to fall in love with her, something the Human Torch has been fully infected with. The remainder of the heroes grow restless, hungry for action, but Captain America continues to preach patience. Others continue to prepare for the battles to come, such as Hawkeye, who is whittling new arrows, his previous ones used up in the escape from under the mountain. Iron Man makes a pass at Captain Marvel, who is still fairly new to the superhero game, but she's in no mood for what she calls singles bar chit-chat, and flies off. Once again, your mileage may vary, but I love this Monica Rambeau Captain Marvel figure. Again, it goes back to nostalgia. It goes back to what was your experience when you first came across these characters. And when I was originally reading the Avengers, this was Captain Marvel. I didn't know anything about Carol Danvers. I didn't know anything about Marvel. All I knew was this woman was named Captain Marvel. And it's equally important because she was the last hero that I needed in order to complete the cover recreation for the first issue of Secret Wars. So just a crucial, crucial piece to my collection, and one that I feel like is done really, really well. You know, she's got great proportions. Her suit is just so clean, just black and white is hard to go wrong with. And I really like how they managed to capture the wings, kind of the sort of semi cape underneath here. I think it flows really well, and it works in every position with her arm straight or her arm bent. Now we've seen a lot of valid attempts but total fails at getting Spidey's wings right. This is one where it just truly does work. But the head, with that great expression, that face print, and that gorgeous hair, just crushing that style, is just, it just makes this an absolute beast of a figure. So she's gotten a little bit of flack from, you know, other YouTubers and other people, but not from me, baby. This is my Captain Marvel, and I absolutely love her.
Professor Xavier's telepathic information was correct. The forces of evil had been dispatched to an active volcano, where they were met by the X-Men. As usual, the two sides sit down and calmly discuss their differences, listening intently to the needs of the other. Nah, I'm just kidding. They get into a huge fight. Recognizing his power, Wolverine targets Molecule Man, and just as he is about to administer the killing blow, Cyclops deflects his strike. Less decisive is Rogue, the newest member of the X-Men. She had recently turned from villain to hero, and as she ponders which side she truly belongs on, she gets clocked by Titania.
I'll admit, Rogue's a tough one because we really haven't gotten the right costume for her. We haven't seen her with the super short hair that she had, but this is the closest thing with the ponytail, so you can kind of hide it back there. The white streak on this is way bigger than it needs to be, but this figure did come with kind of the little skirt, which I think is best represents what we've seen. Plus, that costume does kind of have some lines on it, and while this is obviously way more with the X symbols and more lines, it's the closest one that I think that we've gotten. You know, the Outback Rogue is probably my favorite one so far. I like it better than kind of all of the Jim Lee versions that we've had. And we truly haven't had an 80s version of Rogue. And I don't know that we ever really need one. It's probably her least interesting look. And it would only be for just psycho completionists like me that would want it just to complete our Secret Wars display. But in the meantime, this is as close as we're going to get, so this is what I'm sticking with.
As the issue ends, Galactus is nearing completion on the mechanism he's been working on, while Doom continues his own independent plans for victory. And a new variable, perhaps friend, perhaps foe, lurks in the shadows. It has all come down to this, the final issues of Marvel's greatest comics crossover event, Secret Wars. But we're not just giving you the complete comics history, no, we're going through the action figures as well, including replicating every cover of this landmark series using Marvel Legends. Hey y'all, welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures. Issue 7 begins with a surprise, the appearance of Spider-Woman. She reveals that the battle world that they are all on is made up of components of many worlds, including the suburbs of Denver, where she's from. Given her abilities, the heroes decide to trust her, knowing that they will need all the help they can get for the battle to come. This is the second version of Julia Carpenter's Spider-Woman that we've gotten in Marvel Legends 6-inch scale, and this one is clearly superior. This is the one from the West Coast Avengers box set, so it's a much newer figure. It's completely pinless. It's on a newer female body. And I'm not going to lie, man, this thing is just gorgeous. This is like any 80s kid's dream right here. It speaks to the strength of Mike Zeck's design for the black costume, but there are significant differences between Julia Carpenter's costume and Spidey's costume. One, yeah, the Spidey logo is really close, but Spidey's has like a notch down here where Spider-Woman's comes down to a point. Obviously, the white on the sleeves and the leggings makes a big difference, and of course, the open mouth where you get, you know, those ruby lips, and it just makes it much more feminine. Probably the biggest difference, other than just the superior construction
of this Marvel Legends body and, all of the incredible articulation that comes with it is the hair. Oh man, that hair is just right out of a 1980s Prel ad. Oh, this is just 80s gorgeousness all in one. But as the heroes are settling in, the wrecking crew blast through their village in a futuristic tank, tossing out the lifeless body of the Wasp as they plow through. The alien healer Zaja does her best, but it's too late. The Wasp, a founding Avenger, is dead. A rage for vengeance boils over the Allies, but Captain America commands that they stand down, as their vigil watching over the world devourer Galactus takes precedence over revenge. It is an order that not everyone follows. The Wrecker and his wrecking crew are some of the hardest to find, most sought after, and most expensive figures on the secondary market. And part of that is because they're just so old. Piledriver and Thunderball both date back to 2012's Armin Zola line. They were a running change. I actually got Piledriver with my shipment from Big Bad Toy Store from that wave, and I had to get Thunderball off the secondary market. Wrecker is not much better. He showed up in the Rocket Raccoon wave, which was incredibly difficult to find back in 2013, and Bulldozer is the baby of the bunch, only being 8 years old in the movie Ultron Build-A-Figure wave. So these are 4 figures. They're a little bit dated. We've got kind of the old hips on some of these. They're a little bit oversized, but man, they make an impressive bad guy display. Meanwhile, a side battle rages between the forces of Magneto and the X-Men and the villains led by Doc Ock. At this point, Wolverine is tired of playing by the rules and takes the most direct route to help his teammate Storm, slicing right through the Absorbing Man's arm in the process. The skirmish ends in a draw, as both sides retreat to their respective bases. Back at safety, Absorbing Man attempts something he has never before tried, reattaching his severed arm. There are some characters that just were made to be toys, and one of those is Absorbing Man. And we've gotten a few different Absorbing Mans through the years, and honestly, they've all been terrific. Even going back to Toy Biz's 5-inch figures, I mean, those things actually were really good. But this Absorbing Man is outstanding. He just looks like the bad guy. That giant bald cranium, that look on his face with the cocked eyebrow. He's got his veins popping out on his chest. But of course, this is a figure that really has the ability to show off his superpower, his ability to absorb any kind of material. So here I've got him with his wrecking ball, or basically his prison ball, and you can see by touching it, he's absorbed the metal. And I really love how that metal look kind of bleeds up into his arm. But since this was a Build-A-Figure, he came with a bunch of extra parts, which is not necessarily commonplace for a Build-A-Figure. But you got an extra head sculpt that has even more of that kind of crazy look to it. I love how the eye turns like golden. I think this is meant to be more of like a stone look, but look at how great that paint app is as it just sort of fades right over the top of his head and it's kind of right there on his chin. That is really good. The wooden texture, which pretty dumb if you're wanting to fight, say Wolverine. Of course, obviously turning to stone didn't help fighting Wolverine either. But the wooden is cool. I mean, it definitely has a completely different texture to it. I love how you can see like the tendons in his fingers coming out, like the little knot on the wood is right there at his knuckle. And you did get a true stone version, which is very different from the metallic version and even has some of that paint splash kind of coming all the way up into, his shoulder area there. So cool. And this one it goes on this side of the body. So that actually makes sense and fits with this head, which is just a nice touch. Absorbing Man, you get the award for most toyetic figure of the line. As Absorbing Man heals, the wrecking crew return to their quarters, where Bulldozer is in for a surprise. The now savage She-Hulk proceeds to beat him to a pulp for what he did to the Wasp. Jennifer makes quick work of the wrecking crew, but finds Titania to be a significantly tougher foe. The combined might of the villains proves to be too much, as they stand over the top of the defeated Jade Giantess,
ready for the killing blow. Let me tell you, it took a bunch of different She-Hulks to do all of the different cover recreations that I needed the different looks of She-Hulk for. Starting with this one from the 2007 Blob Build-A-Figure wave. You know, She-Hulk is kind of a happy-go-lucky character, and sometimes you need her smiling. And I think this is actually kind of a really great smiling She-Hulk. Yeah, she's got, you know, those 15-year-old crazy ball hips, but she's tall. She's like a really, like, big figure, so that's actually, you know, kind of works. I think this is one of the strongest She-Hulks that we've gotten, despite its age, particularly when you compare it to a She-Hulk that came out in the exact same year, the Savage She-Hulk in the Fing Fang Foom wave. Oh boy, this is what Hasbro started out as. I mean, just, you know, oh, I've actually never even looked at that, and probably should never look at that again. I did use this face on one of the covers because I thought it matched pretty well, but man, this is terrible. Look at these elbows. It's that crazy single elbow. Yeah, I used the head because it obviously popped right off. Thankfully, it was on a ball peg so that I could use it, but this little kind of cloth good Savage She-Hulk top, ugh, not great. Now, some of our newer She-Hulks have definitely improved as far as sculpt and articulation, and just the savage nature of this head sculpt is really great. Obviously, much more modern articulation, tremendous sculpting. This should have face print technology, so you can see how much better that likeness is. And I love the action of her green hair flowing. Plus, she's strong, man. That is, you know, a 10-pack ab classic She-Hulk look. But really the one that best fit her look in Secret Wars was the one that came from the A-Force box set from 2017. So this is a roughly 7-year-old figure, but she's actually in kind of the jumpsuit that she was wearing in the Avengers at the time. It's more of a stoic face, and the hair really doesn't look like She-Hulk's hair at all. It's just kind of black instead of having that green to it. But, you know, she does kind of fit the outfit. Now, all of this is basically moot because we just saw in the new Iron Man Retro Wave what is going to be the definitive She-Hulk from this era, and I, for one, can't wait. Meanwhile, Cap silently watches Galactus, pondering his next move. His fellow Avengers ask to go help She-Hulk, knowing she could be in trouble. But Cap still says no. But then, a telepathic offer comes in from Professor Xavier. The mutants will monitor Galactus, freeing the heroes to seek their revenge. Secret Wars issue 8 is considered a landmark in Marvel Comics history, sporting this remarkable Mike Zeck and John Beatty cover. It heralds the arrival of the Venom symbiote, although we didn't know it then. We just thought it was a cool new black suit for Spider-Man. The forces of the superheroes launch a frontal assault on enemy headquarters, lusting for blood for their fallen friend the Wasp. They blast through the defenses, just as Doc Ock applies the final blow to an unconscious She-Hulk. The battle rages across the entire issue, with Spidey humiliating Titania, utilizing his speed and agility to negate her advantage in sheer strength. 'Cause, you know, Spidey's the best. As Cap and Torch approach the stronghold of Doom, they are met by the unstoppable Ultron. When Ultron snatches the torch out of the air, Cap orders the torch to use his Nova Flame, the ultimate expression of his flame powers. The intensity of these two panels has stuck with me for 40 years. The sheer destruction the torch causes, and the protective nature of Cap's shield. Ultron's defeated, but the Human Torch is spent for the rest of the fight. After going decades without giving us a proper Ultron figure, Marvel Legends has actually come up with 2 in the recent past, and they're both pretty much on the same buck, which it has that great just classic buck. And Ultron, you know, he's taken on many different looks in the comics over time, but my introduction to him was in Secret Wars, and so I think of him like this, with this much more simple and classic shape. Now, this would have been a perfect figure for the Mattel line back in 1984. He would have been cheap. You would have basically used the same base body, given him a new head, painted him silver, and it would have worked out. But No, it took over 20 years for us to get a decent Ultron. And one of the reasons why I like this one is when you think about that scene of him with the Human Torch, where the Human Torch kind of goes with his Nova flame to finally melt something on the inside of Ultron. I think that this Kirby crackle, this red and yellow Kirby crackle, kind of reminds me of that. So that's why I've picked this as my go-to Ultron for Secret Wars. With the battle won, the heroes tend to the wounded, while Hawkeye and Captain Marvel are shocked to find the Wasp has returned from the dead. Easy choice for the Hawkeye figure. The new deluxe version is just eat up with 80s goodness, all the way down to the bow that really much more resembles what he had during the 1980s at the time of Secret Wars. I really like how Jim Shooter played up the fact that Hawkeye was basically the only kind of regular guy that made it onto Secret Wars. I mean, everybody else has the proportionate speed and strength of a spider, or they could, set their whole body on fire. Hawkeye's just a dude with arrows, and all of his trick arrows got used up in issue 4 when they had to escape from underneath the mountain that Molecule Man dropped on top of him. And so Hawkeye had to kind of find a new way to be useful for the team, but as a longtime Avenger, he certainly continued to be an influential character throughout the rest of the series. You saw him like whittling arrows and getting ready, and just was the consummate hero, despite the fact that he was also the only true human. Another panel that stuck with me was this one, where Reed Richards was repairing Iron Man's armor, the armor that was being worn by James Rhodes at the time. While Reed marvels at the sophistication, Rhodey, still unsure of himself and his legacy as Iron Man, asked Reed if he was surprised that it was a black man under the suit. Reed, without looking up from his work, replies, "I never gave it a thought. I knew there was a man under there." I only owned 3 Secret Wars figures as a kid. I had the red and blue Spidey, the black Spidey, and this Iron Man. This is my original red and gold, red and yellow Iron Man from 1984. He has been well loved. You can see his unibeam has been completely worn off. He's definitely got some significant scuffs up here on his armor mask. But what a great figure. The base body for Secret Wars, I think, really worked for Iron Man. He does have a unique torso sculpt with his battery packs. He's got his jet boots. He's got his repulsor blast gloves. And this is just a gorgeous action figure. I mean, I put this thing, it still sits on the front row of my Iron Man armory because I will put this Iron Man up against any that has been made since. It is that perfect of a version of classic Iron Man. I have more than my fair share of great classic 70s and 80s Iron Men, but I don't think any of them really, really capture that candy-colored goodness the way the Mafex does. This thing is everything I dream of when I think about this suit of Iron Man armor. I think that helmet is just absolutely perfect. I love the unibeam on the front. Some of Hasbro's more recent ones have had a unibeam that wasn't the same yellow color as the rest of his costume, and that's distracting to me, whereas this one really gets it right, and there's just that little bit of kind of clear plastic over the top of it that does make it stand out, but doesn't distract from the look of it. The combination of the yellow and the red that they chose for this plastic is just so good, and of course, he's got all the features that you would expect, including his power batteries, and you can even switch his feet out to little rollerblading feet, because that's what somebody that can fly needs, is roller skates on his shoes. But overall, just the proportions, just everything about this screams classic 80s Iron Man, and it is a worthy successor of our original Secret Wars figure. Then, the turning point. Spidey notices Thor sporting new threads when Hulk tells him there's a machine in the next room that will create any clothing you could think of. So Spidey enters, goes to what he thinks is the costume machine, and a small black blob appears, triggering his Spidey sense, but before he can respond, the wall crawler's life is changed forever. And so is comic history. In what can only be described as marketing brilliance, Mattel was able to get the Black Suit Spider-Man onto store shelves for Wave 2 of their Secret Wars figures. So you had a Spidey in Wave 1, you had a Spidey in Wave 2, and man, does he look slick. Again, this is one where I feel like the base body works really well for Spider-Man because it's a much more lean, athletic, muscular body, and it looks that much more athletic all in black. This one has a pretty decent spider logo still. Obviously, they get worn off pretty easily over time. A little bit of a scuff over there to his right eyelet, but I am super proud to have my original Black Suit Spidey still in my collection. For years, I considered the Black Suit Spider-Man that was on the Pizza Buck to be the best. It was kind of longer and leaner. It had much larger white eyes, and I still think that it probably best represents a Todd McFarlane version of Black Suit Spidey. But when we're talking about 80s Spidey, when we're talking about the Mike Zeck Spidey that premiered in Secret Wars, you've got to go with the retro cardback version. First off, the eyes are much more in line proportion-wise with what we saw in the 80s. He has the perfect spider emblem, and this frame on the retro Spidey body, it's a little bit more compact, it's a little bit more muscular than the Pizza Spidey body, and I think it does. It looks much more like what you saw Spidey looking like throughout the 1980s. I still absolutely love this body frame for I think mostly because of how much crunch, how effective that crunch is, and how this ball joint, this ball diaphragm really lets Spidey get into some unbelievable poses. This is one that, I still use the retro red and blue Spidey for most of my photography, and there's a great reason why. Now, this is on an older body. It does still have pins, but that's pretty, it's really a non-factor on Black Suit because everything blends seamlessly. I love this figure more than I thought I ever would because I really thought I would never replace the Pizza Buck Spidey, Black Spidey, but for 80s, mid-80s, Ron Friends, Mike Zeck time frame, this is the go-to. With the 9th issue, the battle shifts into yet another phase as the final plan of Galactus begins to take shape. Such a great cover to see the combined forces of Marvel's greatest heroes united at last against a common foe. The X-Men begin the assault, with no success. The main Marvel heroes soon join in, with similar results. Richards asks the forces to yield to Galactus. He has reasoned that if Galactus wins this contest and is granted his desire by the Beyonder, then his insatiable hunger will be ended and billions of future lives would be saved. Just as Reed tries to convince his allies that surrender and death would be for the greater good of the universe, he disappears. Richards is transported aboard Galactus' world ship, where he comes face to face with the Devourer of Worlds himself. Secret Wars issue 1 hit stands, and it wasn't like all of the rest of the Marvel Universe just stopped for a year. Basically, things went right back to the status quo the very next month in their books while the story of Secret Wars ran. So you kind of knew some things that were going to happen at the end of Secret Wars because you were reading the books at the same time. And the Fantastic Four books at that point were written and drawn by John Byrne, the man who redesigned their costumes to look with the blue and the white, which is often called the Negative Zone costumes because they switched over to this when they returned from an adventure in the Negative Zone. And John Byrne is somebody who truly understood Reed Richards. He made him the hero by his nerdiness. His intellect was the thing that made him so great. And this recent retro cardback Marvel Legends Reed Richards is kind of the definitive version of this costume, but it's not the one that I feel like best represents the Secret Wars storyline. No, for that, you've got to go back to 2007, one of the earliest Hasbro waves to get this monstrosity. This is the Reed Richards in the John Byrne costume that was in the Ronan the Accuser Build-A-Figure wave. Yeah, he's got bendy wire arms. He's got
legs with articulation. He's got big feet to allow him to stand. Of course, there's a bendy wire in this abdomen. This is the best realized, fully stretched out Reed Richards we've ever gotten. Now, the face is of its era. This thing is, 15, almost 17 years old now, and you can kind of tell it there. I wish that it was on a ball peg because I would obviously switch it out for the more recent one. But overall, this is a great character. And if John Byrne understood that Reed's intellect and his humanity were such a crucial part of the character, Jim Shooter, the writer of Secret Wars, he got it as well. And Reed, despite not really doing anything as a superhero, was clearly one of the leads and one of the leaders in this book. And it was all based on the fact that he was the smartest guy there.
Look, this thing is truly amazing. I mean, it is an absolute masterpiece of action figure art. But let's be honest, it's huge, it's hard to work with, and in a lot of ways, it just doesn't top 2005's Galactus. Now, you probably don't understand what it was like back in 2005 to hear that Toy Biz was including something called a Build-A-Figure with their action figure parts, and that the very first one was going to make a giant Galactus. Now, doesn't seem so giant now compared to our HasLab, but it definitely has that 80s styling. I mean, it sort of has kind of that cross between what John Byrne was drawing and what Jack Kirby originally created. I mean, these are so Kirby. This is so Kirby. But I think that face, that head sculpt, has a lot of 80s John Byrne. And John Byrne had featured Galactus a great deal in Fantastic Four leading up to Secret Wars, so he was a fairly well-known, even to comic readers at the time. It wasn't like you had to go back to the 60s stories of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby to understand it. But Galactus plays a pretty dadgum vital role throughout all of Secret Wars, and he has that little touch of humanity in the book when he and Reed are talking, and Reed asks about Sue's pregnancy, and of course, because the story is happening after what had happened in the timeline, we kind of know how that one's going to end. But it gives Galactus, who is just this giant force of the universe, just a touch of humanity, and it's those little touches that really separate this book from other just silly events. So let's go with 2005 Galactus. Back on the planet, Reed returns, still convinced of Galactus's role in the greater plan. Cap disagrees and prepares to fight. A fight that will feature man and mutant side by side as equals. They attempt a frontal assault, but are quickly repelled. Then, the Fantastic Four join the fight, with Richards having a change of heart, his desire to see his wife and unborn child deemed worth fighting for. But none of it matters, as Galactus escapes, and as he prepares to devour the planet and all of its energies in preparation for his final encounter with the Beyonder, first he consumes his homeworld ship. But during that brief moment of distraction, Doom strikes. The issue ends with Doom using the dissected body of Claw as a lens to absorb all of Galactus's power for himself. Marvel Legends have provided us with two different figures of Claw, and I wish I had like a magic wand and could somehow combine the two of them. This one is obviously the newer one. It's on a much better base body. It has more modern articulation with the hips. It has a much more modern frame. It's got good butterflies. I think the head sculpt is pretty good. I do kind of like that open mouth that it has. And he does have, his weapon, his sound blaster here on the right hand. The colors are a little bit darker, but overall, it's a better frame for this figure. But in so many ways, I actually prefer this original one. I like the colors better. I like the way that the red and the purple really bounce off of each other that much harder. This Sonic Blaster, I think, is much more accurate to the comic look of the 1980s. I think that this is the one that best represents what we saw in Secret Wars. And while the newer one has a great head sculpt, it has a bunch of like doohickeys and stuff on it, whereas I kind of like the simpler look of this one. Now, unfortunately, he's on a much older body that just, really kind of doesn't stand up to today's standards. But in so many ways, this is still the Claw figure that I prefer.
Poor Nightcrawler didn't have a lot of story beats in Secret Wars, which is a real shame because he is truly one of the cooler, more unique characters in all of the Marvel Universe. Someone who looks like the devil, even has the little pointy tail to go along with it, but is a devout Catholic and just an all around good guy. Somebody who is kind of a mischievous mutant who can teleport from place to place, but also is a little bit of a swashbuckling swordsman. And I love this new Nightcrawler figure. The articulation on it is so good. He really crouches well, which I think is vital for a figure with the kind of agility that Nightcrawler has. They nailed these little elven feet and his three-fingered hands. It's just really good. We could have used a little bit more Nightcrawler love in this storyline, but I'm glad that the Hasbro Marvel Legends team gave us some huge love with this figure. As we move to the final 3 issues of Secret Wars, the story shifts to focus on Doctor Doom. This was by far the most difficult cover to recreate. There's simply no way to get the level of detail that Mike Zeck put into this cover, which was inked by the legendary Terry Austin. But with a lot of Photoshop magic, I think I came close. Galactus continues to drain the energy contained in his home ship. The process of obtaining it all was blinding, but just as Galactus prepared to absorb it into himself, all of that power flowed away towards Doom Base. Using Claw's body as a lens, Doom captured the awesome power cosmic of Galactus, and it is perhaps more than a mortal mind can handle. The heroes race to the scene, with Magneto using his mastery of magnetism to transport them in a damaged ship. This leads to an encounter that not only shaped my understanding of the Marvel Universe, but made a point greater than expected for disposable kids' entertainment. The tensions between humans and mutants had been building throughout the series. Now, as Captain America must trust a known murderer and mutant supremacist like Magneto, his loyalties are tested. Wolverine gets involved, wanting to know if Cap's highfalutin ideals of liberty and justice apply to all, or only humankind. Then Wolvie takes it up another level, comparing the persecution of mutants to that of the Jews by the Nazis. When Cap responds that nothing justifies terrorism, Wolvie says something that has stayed with me for 40 years. He says, "Terrorist? That's what the big army calls the little army." Comic books are a medium that can address difficult topics, and with this 1 6-panel segment, it impacted how I saw the world from then on. But before we hand Jim Shooter the Pulitzer Prize for Literature, comics can also sell toys, as Doom uses his newfound powers to create a brand new set of armor, one that toy maker Mattel had demanded as part of their partnership. And with it, he began his assault on the Beyonder. A battle of such ferocity that it began to tear the fabric of space itself. Doom advanced, but even the omnipotent power of the cosmos was no match for the Beyonder, and Doom fell. Yet even as he lay broken and defeated, barely hanging on to life, he woke. Ignoring the pain, he continued to fight back against the Beyonder. The force of their conflict shook the foundations of Battleworld, destroying Doom Base in the process. Cap ordered everyone out, while he went to the basement in a desperate attempt to free the captured villains below. He was joined by Wolverine. The two struggled to save those who had just tried to kill them. The heroes came to a much better understanding of each other, with Wolvie realizing that Cap's ideals apply to all, heroes and villains, humans and mutants alike. It's hard to overstate just how important this brown suit Wolverine figure is. At the time, Marvel's licensing efforts had really always surrounded Spider-Man, Captain America, and the Hulk. The secondary characters, even characters like Iron Man, were really completely unknown to the general population. But X-Men comics were hugely popular, and Mattel paid attention and included Wolverine in the first series of figures. Now, he has these snap-on claws. Mine are the silver. I think there was also a version in black that maybe is a little bit more rare. They pop right on and off his wrist. I think that's a good compromise for what we're going for here. They're actually super long, which is kind of cool, but it's a pretty doggone accurate looking Wolverine figure. And yeah, he's the same height as Captain America. You're just going to have to let that go. They made Wolverine in 1984.
Marvel Legends have produced a ton of great Wolverine figures over the years, including some really good ones in the brown costume, which is what Wolvie was wearing at the time of Secret Wars. But for my cover recreations, I kind of cheated. I went with the Mafex Wolverine, partly because this articulation is just so good. I mean, he can crunch and crouch. The butterfly on this shoulder is great, so you can really get his claws in front of him. But as great as that figure was, it still wasn't, for me, completely perfect. So I've actually got a custom head from Casting Couch here that I think actually really brings out that Mike Zeck, John Byrne look. And when you put it up on the corner box, it just really fits with everything going on. So this is my tiny little version. You know, Wolverine's only supposed to be like 5'3", and because these Mafex figures are just slightly smaller in scale than the 6-inch Marvel Legends, I think it makes it even more perfect for a 1980s Wolverine figure. But all of that may have been for nothing. As our heroes look to the sky, a blinding light appears. It would seem the war is over, and Dr. Doom has emerged victorious. Our heroes mass behind Cap, but then Doom stands before them, removes his mask, and lets them know the war is over. The cover to issue 11 is a direct continuation of that final page from issue 10, as the now healed Victor Von Doom greets the assembled heroes. The look of shock on their faces tells the story. They are staring at the once scarred visage of Doom, now returned to his youthful beauty. Doom tells them there is nothing more to fear, then simply leaves. Ah, yes, arguably the most controversial figure in the line, definitely the one that took the most liberties from his normal look, is Dr. Doom. This was one where Mattel actually kind of put their feet down and said, no, the original look of Dr. Doom is too medieval, although he looks pretty medieval here in the images in his lenticular shield. They wanted a more high-tech version, and this is what made its way into the later stages of the comic. Obviously, it's reusing Iron Man's arms and legs, just with a little doohickey around his leg there, but it's a pretty classic looking Dr. Doom head. And then when it was redone, I actually think I was more excited when this 2-pack was announced for the Captain Marvel figure, our first true Monica Rambeau Captain Marvel figure. But now that I have them both in hand, I really love this Dr. Doom. I mean, he was so great to be used for recreating those covers of those final 3 issues. You had to have this figure in order to do that. And this is one where I think reuse of parts is not only completely appropriate, it's honoring the tradition. Iron Man arms, Iron Man legs, added a little doohickey. Boom, you've got your Secret Wars tech Dr. Doom. But thankfully Hasbro did take it kind of to the next step. You can easily pop this head right off. He comes with a mask down, and you get the unscarred, healed face of Doom. And it's a completely new head sculpt. It definitely captures that confidence of Victor Von Doom, the godlike Doom that we saw at the end of this series. Just an all-around great figure, one that, you know, paid homage to action figure history by reusing parts, but gave us something completely new. And I'm hopeful for something along this level of quality in an upcoming Secret Wars line. Speaking of leaving, Molecule Man simply scoops up the Denver suburb that had been transported to Battleworld, and he and the remaining villains head back to Earth. But hey guys, we still have 2 issues left in this series. I don't think things are over quite yet. So while the Hulk sleeps, a mysterious force comes over him. As he lumbers around, oblivious to his surroundings, Spider-Woman attempts to stop him, and while she's sorta successful, the mystery force then transfers from Hulk to Spider-Woman, who then goes to seek out the disembodied head of Claw. Up next, Doom summons the remaining participants of the Secret Wars to his newly constructed Tower of Doom. Okay, at this point we're running out of issues, and we have to get all the toy plugs in here somewhere. In a display of his near limitless power, Doom reconstructs Kang, whom he disintegrated back in issue 4, and then sends him back to his proper time stream. If it were only always that easy to get a retcon. Then he offers our heroes their any desire. To their credit, they decline. But as they're leaving, Cap realizes that Spider-Woman is not with them, so he returns to the tower to find her, where he encounters Doom again, and sits down and tries to gain a better understanding of how Doom will handle his new godlike status. While this is going on, Spider-Woman passes on the Mystery Force to Claw. Our heroes have some decisions to make. The X-Man Colossus had fallen under the spell of the healing powers of the alien Zaja, and he was contemplating remaining with her, but he's psychically called to return by Professor Xavier. Colossus was one of the founding members of the new X-Men back in Giant Size X-Men #1, and as such, he is sporting a gorgeous Dave Cockrum designed costume. This is the one from the Juggernaut 2-pack. Sure, we've had a number of other Colossuses, even the really cool one going back to the early Toy Biz Marvel Legends days, but none of them compare to this. I mean, this guy has got the kind of heft that you expect from our Russian farm boy. He's really selling the metallic look, not only with kind of the stripes through the metal, but the sheen of this paint and just how solid that jawline is. Oh, and that hair coming down into that little widow's peak. Colossus kind of had a goofy storyline throughout Secret Wars. Like, he didn't really get used that well. He mostly was kind of a foil for the X-Men and for the Zaja alien. It kind of put him in a bad spot because he was dating Kitty Pryde at the time, and they actually kind of got him out of trouble with that, saying that it wasn't that he truly was in love with Zaja, it was just a manifestation of her healing powers, because, you know, Pete's a good guy, and I don't want to think about him cheating on Kitty Pryde with a crazy white-haired alien woman. But what I do want to think about is getting this figure back downstairs in my secret lounge so that I can have him on display with the rest of my new X-Men. With everyone now reunited, Captain America shares his concerns with Doom becoming all-powerful. Richards agrees, both noting that the first thing a godlike Doom did was repair the scars on his face, a sign his human frailties remain. Cap puts the matter to a vote. They unanimously decide to go after Doom. But as the final votes are cast, a bolt of power rips through the room, instantly killing everyone. We have done it. We have come to the final issue of Marvel's first, and I still believe greatest crossover miniseries event. But with our heroes destroyed and defeated, will this issue simply be a victory lap for an all-powerful Doom? Face front, true believers, there is far more to come. But boy, oh boy, things look pretty bleak to start as we begin with the image of Captain America's indestructible shield shattered into pieces. We're given a quick aside to our villains as they speed home along with the suburb of Denver that they're traveling on. Even with freedom in their grasp, these stereotypical doofuses can't get along, with Molecule Man forced to restrain an enraged Doc Ock for the remainder of the ride home. In a toy line notorious for cost cutting, they actually splurged a little bit on Doc Ock. He has got all 4 of his tentacles with little claspy grabbers there. Of course, this one does have his lenticular shield. The bad guys were square and the good guys were round. Really great Ock head sculpt with some nice paint apps to really kind of get the look of the glasses and that grimace. Now, he's a little buff for Doc Ock, although Ock was actually a little bit fitter in comics at this time. You can see how Mike Zeck drew him in the book. He was in a little bit better shape than what we're used to. I tend to like my Ock much more like this. I think this is our most comic accurate Doc Ock from Marvel Legends SPDR Build-A-Figure wave back in 2018. I think this one was reissued with Silk and an Amazon exclusive 2-pack. That's the real problem, is this is a combination of the original arms that came with him and then the bendy wire arms that came with the animated version. But the problem is, once you try to get these in, they are impossible
to stay back in. I have not had very good success with these arms. And so even though I really love the comic accurate nature of this figure, I continue to be frustrated with these bendy wire arms. Hopefully I can figure them out here pretty soon.
Meanwhile, at Doombase, the now possessed Claw begins to exert his influence on Doom, initially by suggesting Doom may accidentally revive the felled heroes. In an early 80s example of gaslighting, Claw describes how, with a passing thought, Doom could accidentally set in motion a way to bring his foes back to life. Despite Doom's attempts to resist Claw's invasive thoughts, he fails, as the heroes do indeed live to fight another day. A quick aside as we stare at this double-page spread. If you remember at the very beginning of this series, one of Jim Shooter's fiercest rules was that monthly comics shipped on time. But as this double-sized final issue rapidly approached the drop-dead date for publication, there was no way inker John Beatty was going to be able to finish in time. So Marvel rented a hotel suite in New York City, and every available inker in the area worked around the clock, chipping in to get the book done. It led to some uneven pages that looked kinda out of place, like this one, but it also featured some of the earliest published art of future legend Art Adams, who helped with the last-minute inking. Even as a kid reading this in the 80s, I could tell that this page was special. The level of detail in the art was far different from everything else in the issue. This full-page spread is rumored to have been penciled by Adams and inked by another industry legend, Hellboy creator Mike Mignola, the two combining for a page shockingly out of place with the rest of the book. Back to our story. Cap fights through, dispatching Claw to come face to face with Doom. He attacks and is disintegrated. Yet Doom's subconscious reincarnates him, so he attacks again and is destroyed again and again. As Doom loses his perilous grip on reality, Cap extends his hand to help, which is precisely when the entity possessed within Claw strikes. It was the Beyonder all along, lurking behind the scenes, waiting for his chance to regain his power. With Doom now defeated, he and Claw are sent back through the time stream to their rightful places. As Reed Richards works on a plan to return everyone back to Earth, Spidey swings off to find a snack. But the story of what happened between these two panels wouldn't be told for 40 years. As a part of the 40th anniversary of Secret Wars, in 2024, Marvel published a 4-issue miniseries titled Secret Wars Battle World, the entire story taking place between these two panels, and featuring all of the characters who were in the original 1984 Mattel toy line, but did not appear in the original comic miniseries. It was a fantastic way to bring both the toy line and the comic full circle, and it gives us a perfect opportunity to look at those 80s action figures we haven't seen yet.
Wave 2 of Secret Wars did feature Black Suit Spidey, but the remainder of the wave was a little bit of a mixed bag. Now, you could kind of understand why Daredevil might be a choice. He was just coming off of the incredible Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, highly acclaimed comic run, and for comic fans, Daredevil was pretty hot, but obviously he didn't appear in the comic. As far as Falcon goes, Falcon did have a figure in the Migos World's Greatest Superheroes line, so maybe some older kids might recognize him from that line, which had probably been dying on store shelves for a couple of years at that point, but again, an unusual choice. Now, his wings did make for a really nice play feature on this one. Hobgoblin was incredibly hot in the comics at this time. He was quickly becoming Spider-Man's main nemesis, and I would argue the head sculpt on this Hobgoblin continues to be the most comic accurate one we've ever seen. Really, it looks like something straight out of John Romita's original drawings for the character. And then you have Baron Zemo, who's a kind of cool looking figure, but has just absolutely zero to do with this line or anything to do with comics at the time. The failure of these to sell unfortunately meant that Series 3 was shipped overseas. Ah yes,
Here they are, the holy grail, the holy trinity of Secret Wars figures. These three figures are right up there for 80s toy collectors with that Vac Metal Cyborg from the Superpowers line. Because of the failure of Series 2, these were released only in Europe, and I picked these up off of eBay many, many years later. You have Iceman, who is about as simple of a repaint as you could possibly get. He's got Captain America's lower body with the boots on, and the only paint really is just right here at his belt and a little bit at his eyes. My Constrictor figure has been loved. He's been played with. He's got a little bit of scuffs. I like to think about, some young boy in Italy, thinking that the Serpent Society was the coolest thing ever and was like so psyched to get a Constrictor figure. But for me, the jewel of the line is Electro. Anytime you add in a Spidey villain, you know that you're going to get my full attention. This Electro, I actually bought carded, and I went ahead and ripped it, even though it had been on a card for 30 years, because I collect loose figures and I wanted my Electro loose. So he has his original shield. He is absolutely in mint condition. And I guess I wish TikTok existed back, because I probably could have gotten a lot of views ripping open a 30-year-old European exclusive Electro Secret Wars figure. Our story began with the Beyonder promising to grant the victors every wish. But there's only one thing Captain America would ever wish for. And here on this cobbled together planet, that wish did in fact come true. And as our heroes return home, there's one more lingering plot twist remaining. Ben Grimm, the blue-eyed ever-loving thing, has decided to stay behind to forge his own story on Battleworld. And in his place, completing the Fantastic Four, would be the She-Hulk. And with that, the most momentous, colossal, and influential comics crossover comes to an end. Y'all, it took me over a year to complete these cover recreations using Marvel Legends for each of the 12 iconic covers to Secret Wars. Let me know what you think of them in the comments. And hey, if you'd like a digital copy of any or all of these, I have them available in my Etsy store. There's a link down in the description. Telling the story of Secret Wars through action figures is one of the projects I have most wanted to do since starting this channel. So if you enjoyed it, give the video a like. And if you want more of the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.